IoT and embedded systems, what are the threats that they pose? Stick around to find out.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to another great episode of the CySa Plus series. That's right, we're going to be talking about a very popular topic, and that's IoT and embedded systems. And there are millions, if not billions, of these devices, so you need to be aware of the threats. You know, I know what IoT is, Dan. I know what it stands for. Can you tell us a little bit about the Internet of Things?
Actually, I should probably get Zach to come in on the show because he loves to talk about, I don't know if you've heard him out in our common area. Zach will tell me about his refrigerator that connects to the internet invariably and almost daily. I could tell you more about his refrigerator probably than he could at this point in time. But he, over and over again, will tell me, my refrigerator connects to the internet. It connects to the internet. I'm like, really?
Who is IP?
It's got an IP address, does it? It's connected. I like that. Let me just start doing a little thing. What are you? I'm not doing anything. Don't worry. Go just make sure that's connected.
By the way, Zach, you need to get some more milk. You're running low.
Yeah, you're running out. But that is an Internet of Things, right? That's an IoT device. That's not the only type of IoT device. Obviously, refrigerators are probably cornering the market on IoT, and we're specifically looking at more business applications of IoT. And that's why I brought a few friends along with me today for a little show and tell, which is right here. Yes, on the desk. Thank you, Vanna.
Thank you.
We've got a FOSCam camera, which is internet connected, either through wireless or wired. We have this lovely device underneath that, which is called an Epiphan Pearl. It's a streaming device for audio and video, which we use here in our studios. So interesting. Other things that it could be is sensors for maybe inside of ICS and SCADA. What else? It could be a phone, right? You got a phone in your pocket. There's my phone right there. It connects to the internet.
You know,
it is a thing.
That's right. You know, one that's common too is that when you go into, and I know right now, given the fact that we're here in April of 2020, you would find them in large display systems, running display systems, pushing out advertisements, and an IoT device is just, it's kind of funny. It's actually attached to a smart TV. I guess the TV wasn't so smart, but
yeah.
There you go, and it's connected to the internet because we want to centralize the management over all of those displays, and we do that by connecting them to a TCP.
Right, and they're adding more functionality to these devices, so they're super convenient for us, right? They add a lot of utility to our lives, so we like them. Unfortunately, though, a lot of these devices tend to not get pushed out with security in mind, right? I think of the old Uncle Ben, Peter Parker's uncle saying, with great power comes great responsibility. But with IoT, it tends to be, with great ease of use comes great vulnerability a lot of times. And we read about it in the news constantly that these devices are being hacked and accessed, and it's becoming a pivot, create botnets with them, because, again, that security was not in the forefront of the mind of the manufacturer. It was more of, let's create a product that we can sell and make money. Nothing wrong with that. But we, as the consumer and someone who is doing cybersecurity for an organization, need to be aware of that and need to be able to look for those threats so that we can mitigate against them.
I'm going to go back to my A+ training here, Dan, and one thing that I do know is that to use, as a user, right, as a human being, to use any piece of hardware, you need something to run that hardware, and one of the things that we have on a lot of these devices are, things like operating systems, and these operating systems have a very dedicated service that they provide. Can you tell us a little bit about the concept of an embedded system and why we need to be aware of that?
Yeah, great question, because this is really going to push us into those types of threats we need to worry about. An embedded operating system is just exactly what Wes was describing, the fact that I have a piece of hardware, it needs to be controlled in some way, so they just use stripped down versions of, well, they can and usually do, use stripped down versions of just regular operating systems. We're talking Linux, we're talking Android, even Windows gets in the game from time to time. Interestingly enough, my FOSCam here, I think, is running an embedded version of Linux. So just kind of stripped down, but still Linux under the hood. And then the Pearl is running Windows 7, an embedded version of Windows 7.
Ouch.
Yeah, a real fun one on that, and this is going to start moving. Actually, I'll save that for when we jump directly into the threats.
Sure.
One other thing I wanted to go ahead and jump to, since we now understand what an embedded operating system is, system on a chip, or SoC, or system on chip, you might see it that way. These are embedded systems that reside on a single chip, and this is meant to save space. All right, so if you see system on a chip, that is to think of embedded systems, but for a very small form factor that is running probably very, very minimal functionality for a very specific job.
Arduino comes to mind, right? Arduino, it's
Right.
got everything: USB controller, memory
Right.
controller, CPU, graphics,
all
all built into that
right
one
there.
little device.
That's right. One-stop shopping.
So love the functionality, but then we also have to understand that we have the same attack surface, I can only imagine, as a full-blown workstation, because everything is in that little chip.
Right. So now we have all our IoT information. We understand what IoT is, embedded operating systems, system on a chip. Let's start moving into those threats. Okay. So because they are running operating systems, they are susceptible to operating system vulnerabilities from whatever version, kernel, or otherwise, maybe the operating system itself has its own vulnerabilities. That is going to be a problem that you need to be aware of. Like I said, this Epiphan Perl right here that is running an embedded version of Windows 7. And Wes rightfully was like, oh, ooh. Now, let's put things in perspective. This device probably, and I'll say probably because I don't want to speak in absolutes on this, but shouldn't be connected to the internet. It's not meant to do that, or you shouldn't be doing that, not with this, right? It is updated to the latest and greatest that it can be updated to. It does not have any further updates, and it's still Windows 7, right? But Windows 7 has vulnerabilities. I've actually scanned this device, and I was connected to it on an internal line. So if I was in a threat actor and I somehow gained internal network access, I would scan for devices and I would find this little guy and I would go, oh, it's running Windows 7. Interesting. You don't suppose that eternal blue attack would work? Oh, yeah, it does, because I totally hacked this thing. That was fun, and was able to gain shell access remotely to this device. And from there, I could use it as a pivot, and I could start looking for other devices. So this would need to have some sort of compensating control in front of it to weed out those types of attacks if that were to occur. But I need to know that. I need to know that that's a part of my attack surface and that it could be an issue because it is running Windows 7. The other thing is like this guy's running Linux, right? I know Linux fairly well. I would probably do something. And actually, you know what? Let's jump in. Let's look at my laptop for a second. I looked up this device to see, are there any issues with it? Guess what? There are. You'll notice the vulnerability details here. This is a CVSS score of 9.0. Yep, that's correct. Confidentiality impact complete. Integrity impact complete. Availability impact complete. Access complexity low. This is not good for me if I'm running these on my corporate network or my organization network, right? We start to see, I checked and made sure the firmware was susceptible. Everything about this device is completely susceptible to this. And there's even down, if you go a little lower here, right here under the references for the CVE, you have a couple of links that you can go to learn more about this. Clicked one of those links, which is this one right here, from Voodoo. Major vulnerability and exploit in FOSCAM cameras. For the past several months, Voodoo's security research team has undergone broad-scale security research in leading IoT products, and they were able to gain complete system access to this thing through chaining a multitude of vulnerabilities together. I had a few CVEs. Where was that? There they are, right there. Let me just highlight those for you. Through using these 3 CVEs, they were able to gain that remote access. And there is a highly technical write-up in this this article. So I will make sure this is a part of our learner resources for you good folks out there if you want to play around with something like that, or at least see, starting to look at what looks like some sort of crazy GET requests using some sort of function. So it's got this string cat function. Combine that with a document path of temp ww, and there you go. Magic happens, voodoo occurs, and we have shell access. It's a little more complicated than that, but you start to see that these things are something we need to worry about, and that is a problem. I'll just show you what I learned from it. I did an Nmap scan on it. I found that it is running port 88 using light HTTPD of version 1.4.35. I can look for vulnerabilities for that. I see that it's running FTP, pure FTPD. I can look for vulnerabilities for that, or maybe do something like if it's got anonymous authentication. If it doesn't, I can try brute force with Hydra, something to that effect. And then if we look at the interface itself, which is right here, get logged in. We see there's the interface for it. It's a web-based camera. Can I throw attacks at it from at the web application? Maybe the web application will give me some sort of inroad into the system itself, right? And you've got to remember, this is all protected by a username and password. Did I set that with the requisite amount of strength to keep malfeasance out of my system, right? So these are all things, and you're just starting to look at how this one device has increased my threat landscape and my threat surface by quite a bit. And all I had to do is understand that I need to be looking for vulnerabilities associated with these devices. They're not just plug it and play it and love life. They do have problems.
Dan, in operating systems, I know one of the things that they try to do is they try to maintain the performance, and they do that with a little bit of sleight of hand behind the scenes. You know, we have caches, we have buffers, we store information for a temporary period of time so the CPU can maintain its work. That's your typical traditional operating system. However, when we have things like sensor nets and we're pulling in a lot of information, a lot of data from multiple places, we do have operating systems that cannot act on those buffers and caches. And that's where the real-time operating system comes in. Dan, can you speak to that?
Yeah, you did a pretty good rundown, actually. These real-time operating systems are great for systems that need very controlled timed functions. They do a set of instructions. That's what they do, and they perform within the milliseconds of tolerances. They need very, very tight time tolerances, and that's why they call them real-time operating systems. Typically, I think of examples of this to be something like an assembly line welding machine or cutting tool, right? If it doesn't stop cutting at the specific time at a specific place, there could be structural integrity. Or if it's welding and it welds not as far as it should because the time that it says it should weld is off by too far, then the weld isn't structurally sound and the structure that they're building could give way and cause loss of life, right? So these are very important systems. Airbags, deploying airbags, right? The real-time operating system that runs that function on the embedded operating system of the vehicle is one that needs to be very precise and very controlled, because if it doesn't work right, people get hurt or even worse, right? So that's typically where we see things like that. They don't tolerate reboots or crashes very well. So if something like that occurs, you probably want to do a complete system check to make sure everything is working correctly. Do a basically a test run to make sure everything comes out correctly, and before you would want to go after it again. So you could think of things like denial of service attacks coming against these things being very detrimental to their operation. We wouldn't want that. Again, because it does have operating system tendencies, it tends to fall under the purview of threats against operating systems. I went out and found an article from Wired here. An operating system bug exposes 200 million critical devices. And this was a real-time, right? VxWorks, designed as a secure real-time operating system for continuously functioning devices like medical equipment, elevator controllers, and satellite modems, is a popular choice, but it had a real problem, and it could even be weaponized and exploited if you read it right up here. The fallout potentially impacting millions of devices. That's no bueno. So we see things like this happen all the time, and we need to be aware of that. If I am running something that would use VxWorks, I would really want to be aware of this critical threat to that device. So if you have that, it does say, think of how WannaCry and Eternal Blue vulnerabilities. Great article. Highly recommend these things. I put them in the learner resources for you good folks out there to try to help you have some supplemental information to go while you're studying and kind of keep you interested and engaged, because it can be daunting when you're studying. I understand that completely. But basically, if you've got an operating system vulnerability, it's going to go against real-time operating systems as well.
You know, Dan, I know one of the things that we need to have available to us in things like this industry of IoT and embedded systems is sometimes post-manufacturing, you have to optimize your device for a specific functionality. And that's where things like the field programmable gate arrays come in. I think about this, and I'm kind of laughing. It's not really something maybe to laugh at. As I think of, if a technician can go out to the field and program that device on the fly, maybe some of the bad actors can too?
Yeah. It's the cool thing about things that you can program is that if you can program them,
so can he.
They'll do it.
That's right.
So with an FPGA, field programmable gate arrays, these are really cool, basically chips that you have the ability to program and reprogram. they're becoming much more popular than they used to be. They used to kind of have a weird stigma about them, like they were kind of like, well, that's the hobbyists thing, but they became very useful in functionality, so they gained popularity, and now here we are going, there are vulnerabilities to field programmable gate arrays that if you are implementing into your system, you probably need to be aware of. A couple of those vulnerabilities that are probably the big dogs when it comes to these two things, or this thing, is the side channel attacks and supply chains, right? Think of a supply chain attack bad, because a lot of times physical access to the device itself might be required, where you can plug it into the JTAG so that you can program it and give it new instruction sets. But if I'm able to do that through that supply chain attack, in which we've seen happen, it seems strange that someone would be able to stop a cargo ship or gain access to a cargo ship, grab a bunch of these devices, open the boxes up, open the box of the device that has the chip in it, connect to it, put a backdoor in it, put everything back the way it was, where it looks like it never was touched, and then ship it off to you, and you plug it into your system, and they're like, yay, it phoned home, I now have access to something, right? But it does happen. It's weird.
One word that comes to mind in the middle of this is Huawei. Right,
right.
That's a company that just comes to mind, and that's why there are sanctions going against them, because they believe that they're doing those supply chain and side channel attacks. Where we looked at the entire board, and this one little microscopic piece on that board, where did that come from? Why is that there? And you learn that, like Dan says, it's calling back home, and it's telling you everything that's going on the device. And something we have to worry about.
That's why you see our country use a Trusted Foundry program, right, to make sure that the suppliers of our devices and our mechanisms are through trusted platforms that they've been vetted and that kind of thing. Did find a good article that came out, it's today the 22nd or the 21st? I can't remember.
It's the 22nd.
Okay, so this came out yesterday.
Yep.
Unpatchable star bleed bug found in FPGA chips exposes critical devices to hackers. This is from the hackernews.com. That is super scary. And he kind of goes into how, I think it's Z-Link. I think that's how you pronounce this right here. Z-Link 7 series and 6 series FPGAs have been covered in this paper, and you can read the paper. Kind of goes into the whole idea of how you can do side channel attack on this guy, or even that physical attack to where you're reprogramming it and doing your own thing all underneath the radar if you can gain that access. Really cool. And it was remote. The side channel attacks, I think, were remote. It was crazy. So check that out. Really cool. This is something you got to look out for when you're talking about FPGAs, so just be aware of that. I think that's all we have to cover for IoT and embedded systems for CySa. Hopefully that helps you out. A lot of road to go down there, but you should be able to get yourself an IoT device, get some hands-on experience with it. Always helpful.
A lot of different topics you have to be, able to identify given a scenario. So remember IoT and the embedded systems, and remember some of the concepts that Dan's talked about surrounding IoT and embedded systems, like real-time operating systems, embedded operating systems too, as well as things like, well, we got to say it, right? The and I don't even know if I'm going to be able to say it. Let me try it again. FPGA. I got flip chip, pin grid array, CPU in my head. I always want to say that.
Don't they?
On that one too. However, we've got a lot more to come in the CySa Plus show, and it's going to take you tuning in. So take care.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.